The machines beside the hospital bed beeped in a slow, steady rhythm, the only sound in a corridor otherwise gone silent at 3 in the morning. A doctor pushed through the double doors, mask still hanging from one ear, and found a woman on her feet before he'd even finished exhaling. "Family of Cha Hyun-seok?" he asked, scanning his clipboard, half expecting the corridor to be empty the way it usually was for men like this. Men with fortunes but no one to spend them on. The woman didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said. "We are his family." She was not his wife. She was not his blood. She was a housekeeper from Nairobi named Makena and Zuri, and asleep in the chair behind her, wrapped around a worn stuffed lion, was the real reason the most powerful man in Seoul's tech industry was fighting for his life that night. A 4-year-old girl named Zuri. To understand how a billionaire ended up with only a widow and a toddler standing guard over him while his own blood relatives sent flowers from a safe distance, we have to go back. Back to a night months earlier, when this same man sat completely alone, and nobody came. Welcome to StoryNestTales. If you're new here, kindly like, subscribe, and comment, because what you're about to watch is the story of how the loneliest man in Korea found a family in the last place he ever expected. Stay with us. It only gets harder from here. The candles on the cake had burned down to stubs, and still no one came. Cha Hyun-seok sat alone at a table built for 12, in a dining hall so large that his own breathing echoed back at him from the marble walls. Outside, rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River, and somewhere beyond that glass, all of Seoul glittered with light and laughter that did not belong to him. He was 42 years old. He was worth more money than most nations. And on the night of his birthday, the only sound in his mansion was the soft, mechanical hum of his wheelchair's motor as he turned it slightly toward the door, still foolishly hoping, that someone would walk through it. No one did. His sister sent a text message. 4 words. "Happy birthday, Appa. Busy." His former fiancée, a woman he had once planned to spend his whole life with, had made her position clear 8 months earlier, in this very room, when she told him she hadn't signed up to spend her life pushing a wheelchair. She left with 2 suitcases and never once looked back. His business partners, his college friends, the men who used to call him a genius, a visionary, a legend, none of them came. There were no gifts. There was no laughter. There was only a billionaire, paralyzed from the waist down, staring at 30 unlit candles in an empty room, wondering if he had ever truly mattered to anyone at all. He blew out the candles by himself, in the dark, and wept the way only a man who has lost everything but his money can weep. Before the accident, Hyun-seok had been untouchable. He built his AI company out of a cramped studio apartment with nothing but a laptop, a stubborn will, and a hunger that frightened even the people who loved him. He worked 18-hour days. He missed his father's funeral to close a deal in Singapore. He told himself every single time that the sacrifice would be worth it once he reached the top. And he did reach the top. Magazines put his face on their covers. Investors fought for a seat at his table. But somewhere between the boardrooms and the billion-dollar valuations, he had forgotten how to simply be a person among people. Then came the highway, a rain-slicked road outside Incheon, a truck that jackknifed without warning, and a crash that folded his sedan like paper. He survived. His spine did not. The doctors used careful, clinical words: incomplete injury, loss of function below the waist, uncertain prognosis. But Hyun-seok heard only one sentence ringing in his ears for months afterward: "You will never walk again." And that was when he discovered the truth about the people around him. The applause had been for his success, not for him. One by one, they disappeared, the way morning fog disappears the moment the sun gets too warm to bear. His mansion, once a symbol of everything he had achieved, slowly became something else entirely. A beautiful, gilded prison, with a lonely king who no longer had a kingdom worth ruling. It was into the silence that Makena and Zuri arrived. She was a 34-year-old widow from Nairobi, raising her 3-year-old daughter, Zuri, alone in a country whose language she was still learning, whose winters still shocked her lungs, whose loneliness she understood in a way she never expected to share with a Korean billionaire. Her husband had died 2 years earlier, and rather than fold under grief, she had scraped together every ounce of courage she had and boarded a plane to Seoul, where a distant cousin promised there was work. She took a job as live-in household staff at the Cha estate not because she dreamed of mansions, but because the pay would keep her daughter fed, clothed, and safe. On her first day, the head housekeeper warned her plainly. Mr. Cha does not like to be disturbed. Do not ask him questions. Do not make eye contact for too long. Do your work and leave him in peace. Makena nodded and said nothing, though privately, she wondered what kind of grief could turn a man into a ghost inside his own home. For weeks, she barely saw him. She cleaned. She cooked. She kept Zuri occupied in the staff quarters, and life at the mansion moved like a held breath. Then, one gray Tuesday morning, Zuri's daycare called to say a pipe had burst and the center would be closed for the day. Makena had no one to call. No family nearby, no friend free on short notice, no other option. Her hands shook as she asked her supervisor for permission to bring her daughter to work. Just this once. Keep her out of sight, the supervisor warned. And whatever you do, do not let her near Mr. Cha. Stay close to me, sweetheart. Makena whispered to Zuri that morning, kneeling down to fix the little girl's braids. Please, please do not disturb Mr. Cha. Promise me. Zuri, 3 years old and utterly unbothered by rules that made no sense to her, nodded with the solemn seriousness only small children can perform, and then promptly forgot the promise within the hour. While Makena scrubbed the kitchen counters, Zuri slipped away, drawn by nothing more than curiosity and the echoing quiet of the enormous house. She wandered past marble statues taller than her mother, past paintings that cost more than her family would earn in 10 lifetimes, until she pushed open a heavy door and found herself standing in a library, staring at a man sitting alone in a chair with wheels. Hyun-seok looked up, startled, expecting a member of staff. Instead, he found a small girl with wide brown eyes and 2 neat braids staring back at him without a trace of fear, without a trace of pity, without any of the careful, tiptoeing sympathy adults always seemed to perform around him. Why are you always by yourself? Zuri asked. The question hit him like a blow to the chest. He opened his mouth to answer, to tell her to leave, to call for someone to take her away. But no words came. In 2 years, not one single person had asked him that question so plainly, so honestly, without flinching. Zuri did not wait for an answer. She toddled closer, reached into the pocket of her little dress, and pulled out half a biscuit she had been saving since breakfast. She held it out to him with both hands, the way children offer their most prized possessions. Completely without calculation. Here, she said. You can have it. Hyun-seok stared at the crumbling biscuit in her small palm for a long moment. Then, for the first time since the accident, since the hospital, since the funeral he wasn't at, since his fiancée walked out the door, he smiled. It was small. It was rusty, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. But it was real. That was the moment everything began to change, though none of them knew it yet. Makena burst into the library moments later, breathless with panic, already forming apologies on her lips. Sir, I am so sorry. She must have wandered off. I told her not to bother you. I will make sure this never. Let her come again. Hyun-seok interrupted quietly. Makena froze. Sir, tomorrow, he said, looking down at the biscuit still resting in his palm. If it's not too much trouble, let her come again. Over the following weeks, something extraordinary unfolded inside that cold mansion. Zuri, with the fearless logic only a toddler possesses, decided that Hyun-seok's wheelchair was, in fact, the greatest race car she had ever seen, and she insisted on driving alongside him down the long marble hallways, both of them laughing as the wheels squeaked against polished stone. She insisted on eating her lunch beside him every single day, narrating her meals with the seriousness of a food critic. She brought him drawings, crooked suns, 4-legged cats, a man in a chair holding hands with a girl in a dress, and taped them proudly to his study wall herself, standing on a footstool to reach. Every Friday became Strawberry Day. Makena would slice a small bowl, and Zuri would insist on feeding Hyun-seok the first one, for good luck. A ritual she invented and never once explained. She introduced him formally to her stuffed lion, whom she had named Simba after a movie she'd watched 100 times, and declared that Hyun-seok was now the lion's uncle, which made him, by her logic, Uncle Hyun, to her as well. He began sleeping through the night for the first time in 2 years. He started eating full meals instead of pushing food around his plate. He asked his physical therapist to increase his sessions. He picked up novels he'd abandoned after the crash and found himself, astonishingly, laughing out loud at a passage while alone in his study. One evening, he opened a journal he hadn't touched since the hospital and wrote a single line before setting down his pen. Today a child looked at me and never once saw what I had lost. Makena watched all of this unfold with a complicated ache in her chest. She had taken this job to survive, not to feel anything for the man who employed her. But she could not ignore what she saw. A man the world had written off, slowly, gently, being pulled back from the edge of his own despair by a 3-year-old who didn't know or care that he was a billionaire. Only that he was sad, and that sad people deserved biscuits and company. Behind the cold titles and the tabloid headlines, she realized, was simply a lonely man who had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted for nothing at all. One evening, Zuri crawled onto his lap without asking permission, the way only small children dare to do, and rested her head against his chest. "Uncle Hyun," she murmured sleepily, "will you always be here?" He did not know how to answer her. No one had asked him a question that assumed a future in a very long time. He simply held her a little tighter and whispered that he would try, which was the most honest promise he had made to anyone in years. Makena, watching quietly from the doorway, felt her throat tighten. She had buried a husband. She had crossed an ocean with nothing. And somehow, in this cold marble house, she was watching her daughter build a family out of nothing but kindness. But not everyone in that house was pleased by the sound of laughter returning to its halls. And what began as quiet suspicion would soon become something far more dangerous. Cha Hyun-seok, Hyun-seok's older sister, arrived one afternoon expecting to find her brother in his usual state of quiet despair. Easy to manage, easy to control from a distance while she quietly ran interference with the board. Instead, she found him sitting up straight, color in his face, actually smiling at something the little African maid's daughter had drawn for him. Eun-kyung's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes did. "Who is that child?" she asked the head housekeeper afterward, in a tone that was polite on the surface and razor-edged beneath it. "The new housekeeper's daughter, ma'am. Zuri. And how often is she here?" "Every day now, ma'am." Eun-kyung said nothing more, but that evening, she made 2 phone calls. The first was to a member of the board, a man named Director Song, who had been quietly hoping Hyun-seok would remain too broken to ever return to the company and reclaim the CEO seat that Eun-kyung currently controlled through his absence. The second call was to a private investigator. Within a week, Eun-kyung arrived at the mansion again, this time asking to speak with Makena alone in the east sitting room. She did not waste time with pleasantries. "I know what you're doing," Eun-kyung said, setting an envelope on the table between them. Inside was more money than Makena would make in 2 years of work. "You've made yourself indispensable to my brother. Clever, really. A grieving man. An adorable child. Very touching. But I want you to take this, and I want you and your daughter gone by the end of the month." Makena stared at the envelope as if it might bite her. Her hands trembled, not from temptation, but from something closer to fury. "Ma'am, I did not bring my daughter into this house to manipulate anyone. I brought her here because I had no one else to watch her for one single day. I have said nothing to your brother that I would not say to any human being suffering the way he was suffering." "Everyone has a price," Eun-kyung said coolly. "Not everyone," Makena replied, and pushed the envelope back across the table. "Keep your money. My daughter has already given him something you clearly never learned how to give your own brother. Attention that asks for nothing in return." Eun-kyung left the room in silence, but the words landed like a slap. That night, Makena lay awake, turning the confrontation over and over in her mind. She thought of her daughter's easy laughter echoing through those cold halls, and she thought of the accusations that would surely follow if she stayed. The whispers, the suspicion, the board members Eun-kyung had clearly already spoken to. She loved her job. God help her, she had begun to care, more than she wanted to admit, about the man in the wheelchair who lit up every time her daughter walked into a room. But she would not let her daughter become a pawn in a fight over money and power that had nothing to do with either of them. Heartsuit. The next morning, she submitted her resignation. Hyun-seok found the letter on his desk before lunch. He read it twice, his hands tightening around the paper until it crumpled at the edges. Then he wheeled himself directly to the staff quarters, something he had not done in the 2 years since his accident, and found Makena packing a small suitcase while Zuri sat on the bed, confused, hugging her stuffed lion. "Is this because of my sister?" he demanded, his voice louder than he intended. Makena's silence was answer enough. "What did she offer you?" "It doesn't matter what she offered me," Makena said quietly, folding a shirt with hands that would not stop shaking. "What matters is that I will not let my daughter be accused of things she is too young to even understand. I will not let her grow up hearing that her mother used her to steal from a rich man. Then stay, and let me handle my sister. And what happens the next time she comes back? Or the board member she is clearly working with? I have nothing to protect us, Mr. Cha. No money, no family here, no power. All I have is my dignity, and I intend to keep it." Hyun-seok wheeled closer, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he spoke not as a CEO, not as an heir, not as a man defending his fortune, but simply as himself. "2 years ago, I had everything, and not one person came to my birthday dinner. Not one. My own sister sent me a text message. The woman I planned to marry told me I was a burden and walked out that door." He gestured toward the hallway, his voice cracking. "And then your daughter walked into my library and asked me why I was alone, and she gave me half a biscuit like it was nothing at all. Do you understand what that meant to me? Do you understand what the two of you have given me, without ever asking for a single thing?" Zuri, sensing the tension though she didn't understand its cause, slid off the bed and walked over to tug gently on Hyun-seok's sleeve. "Uncle Hyun, why are you sad?" He looked down at her small, worried face, and something in his chest finally broke open completely. That evening, he called a family meeting in the main hall. His sister, 2 senior board members, and Makena, standing quietly by the door with Zuri's hand in hers. Hyun-seok wheeled himself to the head of the table, and for the first time since the accident, his voice did not waver. "I know what's been said in this house," he began, looking directly at his sister. "I know money was offered to make this woman disappear. I know whispers have been planted about her intentions. Let me be very clear about something, Eun-kyung. The only people who stayed when I had nothing left to offer are the people you are trying to send away." The room fell utterly silent. "You sent a text message on my birthday," he continued, his voice shaking now, not with weakness but with 2 years of buried grief finally surfacing. "A text message, while I sat alone in that dining room with candles burning down to nothing. Meanwhile, a 3-year-old child who has known me for 6 weeks has given me more genuine warmth than this entire family has offered me since the day of my accident." Director Song shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward Eun-kyung as if hoping she might rescue the moment. She did not. For the first time in years, Eun-kyung found herself with nothing clever to say. "You don't understand," she finally managed, her voice smaller than anyone in that room had ever heard it. "I was protecting you. People take advantage of men in your position, Hyun-seok. I have seen it happen before." "No," Hyun-seok said, his voice steady now. "You were protecting your seat on that board. Don't dress it up as love for me. If you had truly wanted to protect me, you would have come to my birthday dinner instead of sending 4 words from a phone." Eun-kyung opened her mouth, then closed it again. Whatever she had planned to say dissolved under the weight of a truth she could not argue against. "Makena is not resigning," Hyun-seok said finally. "And if anyone in this house or on that board attempts to remove her again, they will find themselves dealing directly with me. I may not be able to stand on my own 2 legs, but I am still very much capable of standing up for the people who matter to me." For a few days it felt like the fight was over. Makena unpacked her suitcase. Zuri's drawings returned to the study wall. The mansion breathed easier. But peace, it turned out, was only a pause. 10 days later, a letter arrived from the Ministry of Justice's Immigration Office, addressed to Makena directly. An anonymous complaint had been filed questioning the legitimacy of her work sponsorship, alleging that her position at the estate was informal and improperly documented. She would need to appear for a review within 30 days, and until then, her status and her right to remain in the country with her daughter was under formal question. Makena read the letter 3 times before the words stopped swimming. 30 days, she whispered. 30 days, and then what? They send us back to a house we don't even own anymore. Hyun-seok did not need a private investigator to know exactly whose fingerprints were on that anonymous complaint. When he confronted Director Song directly, the older man didn't even bother denying it with much conviction. "It's nothing personal, Hyun-seok," Song said smoothly. "It's simply a matter of proper documentation. The board has a duty to ensure everything at the estate is above board, given your public profile." "You mean given how badly you all want me gone from that boardroom?" Hyun-seok snapped back. For the first time since the accident, he threw himself into a fight that had nothing to do with his own body. He brought in immigration lawyers. He personally restructured Makena's employment contract, sponsoring her under a specialized visa tied directly to his own household, beyond the reach of any board committee. He sat through hours of paperwork, phone calls, and hearings, often long past midnight, refusing to rest until every document was airtight. "You don't have to do all this," Makena told him quietly one night, finding him still at his desk at 2 in the morning, papers scattered everywhere, his face gray with exhaustion. "Yes, I do," he said simply. "You stayed when everyone else left. I am not going to lose the two of you to a piece of paper." The review came and went, and Makena's status was fully secured, no longer tied to the whims of a board that resented her, but to Hyun-seok himself. It should have been a victory worth celebrating. Instead, it was the final push that broke him. 3 weeks later, pushing himself harder than ever in physical therapy, running on stress and too little sleep, driven by something new and fragile and alive inside him, Hyun-seok collapsed mid-session. His physical therapist screamed for help. Paramedics arrived within minutes. By the time he reached the hospital, his blood pressure had crashed dangerously low, complications from an old surgical site that had silently worsened for months while he ignored the warning signs, too consumed by every other battle to notice his own body breaking down. This was the moment from the very beginning of our story. The machines, the corridor, the doctor asking a question nobody expected a housekeeper to answer. The news spread through Seoul's business circles within hours. Flowers arrived from investors who hadn't spoken to him in a year. Gift baskets arrived from executives angling for position should the worst occur. His sister sent a brief message promising to visit as soon as the board meeting concludes. Very few people actually came. Makena came immediately, still in her work uniform, Zuri's small hand clutched tightly in her own. She did not leave the hospital corridor for the next 11 hours. She refused food. She refused the nurse's gentle suggestion that she go home and rest. She simply sat, hour after hour, praying quietly in a language the nurses didn't recognize, refusing to let the only person who had shown her family genuine kindness in this country die alone the way he had once lived alone. Zuri eventually fell asleep in the hard plastic chair beside her mother, her arms wrapped tightly around her stuffed lion, Simba, the same lion she had introduced to Hyun-seok weeks earlier and declared belonged to their little family now. When Hyun-seok finally opened his eyes the next morning, disoriented, weak, uncertain for a moment whether he had survived the night at all, the first thing he saw was a small girl asleep in a chair beside his bed, still hugging a worn stuffed lion, her mother's hand resting protectively on her shoulder even in sleep. A nurse quietly informed him that the woman and her daughter had refused to leave even when visiting hours ended, insisting in broken but firm Korean that they were family and had every right to stay. Hyun-seok turned his face away and wept silently, careful not to wake them, overwhelmed by a realization that arrived 2 years too late and exactly on time all at once. He finally understood, with total clarity, exactly who his family was. It was not the sister who sent text messages. It was not the board members sending flowers to protect their own interests. It was a widow from Nairobi and her fearless daughter, who had given him everything and asked for absolutely nothing in return. Recovery took months, but this time, Hyun-seok did not face it alone. When he returned home, he made decisions that would reshape the rest of his life. He appointed Makena as head of household management, a position of real authority and real trust, not charity. He established a full scholarship fund in Zuri's name, guaranteeing her education from that day forward, regardless of what happened to him or his company in the future. He returned to physical therapy with a fire his doctors had never seen in him before, determined not for pride or public image, but because he now had people worth standing for, even if he could never fully stand on his own again. He slowly reconnected with the handful of old friends who had reached out quietly over the years, unwilling to push but always available. And eventually, when the board came calling, he stepped back into leadership of the company he had built, no longer chasing success to fill an emptiness inside him, but building something new, something steadier, because he understood now what truly mattered when the applause faded and the room went quiet. 8 years later, on the evening of his 50th birthday, Hyun-seok sat once again at the head of a long dining table. This time, every chair was full. "Uncle Hyun, blow out the candles already. The ice cream is melting," 11-year-old Zuri complained, rolling her eyes with the particular exasperation only an almost teenager can perform. "Patience," he told her, laughing. "This cake took your mother 3 hours. It took me 3 hours because someone kept sneaking into the kitchen to steal frosting," Makena said from across the table, arching an eyebrow at both of them at once. Even Eun-kyung was there that year, sitting quietly near the end of the table, a plate of cake in front of her. Having spent the last several years slowly earning her way back into a home she had once tried to guard with suspicion instead of love. "You've gotten better at pretending you don't cheat at cards, Zuri," she said dryly, and Zuri grinned back at her without a trace of the wariness that once sat between them. Hyun-seok looked around that table, at the sister who had finally come home, at the woman who had refused to leave a hospital corridor 8 years earlier, at the girl who had once offered him half a biscuit and, without knowing it, offered him his whole life back, and he blew out every candle in a single breath, laughing as the room erupted in applause that asked for absolutely nothing in return. That spring, on a bright afternoon, 11-year-old Zuri stood on a stage at Korea's National Young Artists Competition, accepting first prize for a painting she had worked on for months. The painting showed 3 figures standing beneath a bright, rising sun. A man in a wheelchair, a smiling woman with her hand resting on his shoulder, and a little girl between them, holding both their hands. Reporters crowded around Hyun-seok afterward, eager for a soundbite about his company's latest quarterly earnings, his recent expansion into new markets, the billion-dollar milestones that used to define every headline written about him. Instead, a young reporter asked him a simpler question. "Mr. Cha, of everything you've built, what would you say is your greatest achievement?" Hyun-seok looked toward Makena, standing near the stage with pride shining in her eyes, and then toward Zuri, still holding her trophy, grinning at him from across the room. He smiled, the same rusty, real smile that had first appeared in his library 8 years earlier over half a biscuit. "Building a company made me successful," he said quietly, the reporters leaning in. "But opening my heart to a little girl, and to the mother who never gave up on either of us, made my life worth living." The room fell silent for a moment, and then applause rose, warm and real. Nothing at all like the polite, calculated applause of boardrooms and shareholder meetings he had spent half his life chasing. That night, back at the mansion, framed carefully in his study where he saw it every single morning, hung the very first drawing Zuri had ever given him. 3 crooked stick figures holding hands beneath a lopsided yellow sun, with a single handwritten caption at the bottom in a child's uneven print. "My family." If this story moved you the way it moved us to tell it, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to StoryNestTales for more heartfelt stories like this one, and drop a comment below telling us which part touched you the most. Your support helps this channel keep bringing you stories that remind us what truly matters. See you in the next story.